In this episode, we are going to make cloud terms much simpler, because this is one of those topics where beginners often hear a lot of words that sound clear at first and then start blending together. People say cloud, public cloud, private cloud, software as a service, SaaS, platform as a service, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service, IaaS, as if everyone already agrees on what each one means. But many new learners end up mixing the ideas because they are really two different kinds of categories. One category is about where the service lives and who it is built for, and the other category is about how much of the technology the customer has to manage. Once you separate those two questions, the topic gets much easier. A technician does not need a fancy definition full of marketing language. A technician needs a clear way to decide what kind of cloud setup they are looking at, what the customer is responsible for, and why one model might fit better than another. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A simple starting point is to stop thinking of cloud as magic and start thinking of it as computing resources delivered as a service over a network. Those resources might be storage, applications, processing power, databases, desktops, or other technology functions that do not have to sit directly on the user's local device. The cloud idea matters because it lets an organization use technology without owning, housing, and maintaining every part of it in the traditional way. That does not mean there is no hardware involved. There is always real hardware somewhere, but the important change is that the customer may not be the one touching it, storing it in their own building, or maintaining every piece of it directly. For A+ learners, the main thing to understand is that cloud computing changes where the service runs and how much work the customer must do. Those two ideas show up again and again, and they are the key to understanding the rest of the topic without getting lost. The first big category is the deployment model. This answers the question of where the cloud service lives and who the environment is meant to serve. When people talk about public, private, hybrid, and community cloud, they are not yet describing how much software control the customer has. They are describing the general environment and how it is shared or organized. This is why beginners get confused when they try to compare public cloud directly to SaaS, as if those are opposite choices. They are not. A public cloud tells you something about the environment the service is running in. SaaS tells you something about how much of the service stack the customer manages. A technician needs to keep those ideas separate in their mind, because a company can use a public cloud for one kind of service and still consume that service in a SaaS or IaaS way depending on what they are buying and how much control they need. A public cloud is the model many people think of first because it is the most familiar. In a public cloud, the provider owns and operates the environment, and many different customers use services from that same larger provider environment. That does not mean all customers can see one another's data or mix their systems together in an uncontrolled way. It means the provider is offering cloud services to many customers over shared infrastructure in a controlled way. A beginner can think of public cloud as using a large outside provider's environment instead of building everything in your own building. This can be attractive because it usually reduces the need to buy and maintain all the hardware yourself, and it can make it easier to scale up or down as needs change. For a support technician, public cloud often means the organization is depending on an outside provider for a large part of the infrastructure, while the organization focuses more on using the service than on owning every physical part behind it. A private cloud is different because the environment is built for one organization rather than being offered broadly to many separate customers in the same general service model. That private environment may still use cloud ideas such as pooled resources, self-service access, and flexible allocation, but it is dedicated to one organization's use. A beginner should think of private cloud as a cloud-style environment with more exclusive use by a single organization. That environment might be physically located in the organization's own data center, or it might be hosted somewhere else. But the main point is that it is meant for one organization rather than the open multi-customer structure common in public cloud. This can appeal to organizations that want tighter control, special security handling, or more specific design choices. For support work, private cloud usually means the organization may have more control and more custom requirements. But it may also mean more responsibility, more planning, and more internal work than a simple public cloud service would require. A hybrid cloud combines parts of public and private cloud use in one overall approach. This is common because many organizations do not want an all-or-nothing answer. They may want to keep some systems in a private environment while using a public cloud provider for other systems, extra capacity, backups, or special services. A technician should think of hybrid cloud as a mixed model where different pieces live in different places for practical reasons. One part of the business may need stricter handling, while another part may work perfectly well in a more flexible public cloud setup. This model can be very useful, but it also means the environment is more complex because the support team has to understand where services live, how data moves between them, and what dependencies exist across those boundaries. The big beginner lesson is that hybrid cloud is not just a vague middle option. It is a real design choice used when one cloud environment alone does not meet all of the organization's needs. A community cloud is the least familiar model for many beginners, but the idea is still simple once you remove the fuzzy language. A community cloud is built to serve a specific group of organizations that share similar needs, rules, missions, or compliance requirements. These organizations are not just random customers with unrelated goals. They have something in common that makes a shared environment make sense, such as similar legal requirements, industry standards, government needs, or educational goals. A good beginner way to think about community cloud is that it is shared, but it is shared within a defined community rather than offered as a broad public service to anyone who wants to buy in. This can be useful when a group of related organizations wants some of the benefits of shared cloud services while still meeting needs that are too specialized for a general public cloud approach. For support, the main point is to recognize that the environment is organized around shared purpose and shared requirements. Once the deployment models are clear, the next big category becomes much easier. Service models answer a different question. They tell you how much of the technology stack the customer manages and how much the provider manages. This is where SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS come in. These models are not really about where the service lives. They are about how much responsibility the customer keeps. That is one of the most important ideas in the whole lesson. A company could use a service in a public cloud or a private cloud, but the service model still tells you whether the customer is mostly using a finished app, building on top of a managed platform, or controlling more of the basic computing environment. When a technician understands this, cloud terms stop sounding like one giant group of labels and start making practical sense. You stop asking which word sounds more advanced and start asking who is managing what. Software as a service, SaaS, is usually the easiest service model for beginners to understand because it is the most finished form from the customer's point of view. In SaaS, the provider gives the customer a ready-to-use application, and the customer mainly uses the software rather than building the environment underneath it. The provider handles most of the deeper work such as the infrastructure, platform, and much of the application maintenance, while the customer focuses on user access, settings, and day-to-day use. A beginner can think of SaaS as renting the finished app instead of building the whole system behind it. Common examples include email platforms, collaboration tools, file sharing services, and business applications delivered through a browser or a client app. For support technicians, SaaS often means user accounts, login problems, settings, file access, and workflow support are more likely day-to-day issues than hardware maintenance or operating system patching on the server side. Platform as a service, PaaS, sits in the middle. In PaaS, the provider gives the customer a managed platform that is ready for building, running, or deploying applications without forcing the customer to manage every part of the lower infrastructure. The provider usually handles the underlying hardware, core platform services, and much of the environment, while the customer focuses more on the applications they create or maintain on top of that platform. A good beginner way to picture PaaS is this. The provider gives you the kitchen and keeps the utilities running, but you are still responsible for what you cook. This is helpful for developers and organizations that want to build custom applications without spending all their time managing the lower layers of the environment. For technicians, PaaS matters because it changes where support responsibilities sit. The organization may not manage every server detail, but it still has responsibility for the applications and data it is putting on that managed platform. Infrastructure as a service, IaaS, gives the customer the most direct control out of the three main service models, while the provider still handles the physical hardware and broader cloud infrastructure underneath. In IaaS, the customer gets access to core resources such as virtual machines, storage, and networking, and then builds more of the system on top of those pieces. A beginner should think of IaaS as renting the building blocks instead of renting the finished app. The provider gives you the core environment, but the customer usually has more responsibility for the operating systems, applications, settings, and many parts of the overall setup. This model is useful when an organization wants flexibility and control without buying all the physical hardware itself. For support technicians, IaaS can feel closer to traditional systems administration because the customer may still be dealing with operating systems, patches, configurations, and application problems even though the servers are virtual and delivered through the cloud. A very important beginner habit is learning to compare deployment models and service models without mixing them. Public, private, hybrid, and community cloud tell you about the environment and who it is meant for. SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS tell you how much of the stack the provider manages and how much the customer manages. These are not rival sets of terms. They are different layers of description. A company might use a public cloud provider and consume a SaaS email platform. Another company might operate a private cloud and use it to provide IaaS-style resources internally. Another may use a hybrid cloud approach while relying on both SaaS and IaaS for different business needs. This is why the practical difference matters so much. One set of terms answers where the service lives. The other set answers how much of the work the customer still has to do after the service is in place. These differences become much clearer when you think about everyday support. If a company uses SaaS for email, a technician is more likely to help with account access, sync issues, permissions, and user settings than with rebuilding the mail server itself. If a company uses PaaS for a custom app, the support team may care more about app behavior, deployment, and data handling than about raw server hardware. If the company uses IaaS, technicians may still spend time thinking about virtual servers, storage allocation, operating system problems, and network settings because the customer is managing more of that environment. The support experience also changes depending on whether the service is in a public, private, hybrid, or community cloud setup, because that affects where responsibility sits, how access is controlled, and how the organization connects different systems together. For A-plus learners, that is the real value of these terms. They help you predict what kind of support work is likely to matter. Beginners also benefit from clearing up a few common misunderstandings early. Public cloud does not mean insecure by default, and private cloud does not automatically mean simpler or better. SaaS does not mean the customer has no responsibilities at all, because user management, access control, and correct usage still matter a great deal. IaaS does not mean the customer owns the physical hardware, because the provider is still handling the underlying infrastructure even though the customer controls more of the higher layers. Another common mistake is thinking cloud always means internet-only consumer apps, when many cloud services are business systems with strong identity control, detailed permissions, and careful planning behind them. The right way to think about cloud is not with vague slogans. The right way is to ask clear questions about where the service runs, who else shares the environment, and how much responsibility stays with the customer after the service is delivered. By the end of this topic, cloud deployment models and cloud service models should feel much easier to separate and much easier to explain. Public, private, hybrid, and community cloud describe the environment and who it serves. SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS describe how much of the service stack the provider manages and how much the customer still manages. That practical difference is the key to the whole lesson because it keeps you from mixing location and sharing questions with management and responsibility questions. When technicians understand that difference, they can support users more effectively, ask better troubleshooting questions, and understand what kind of cloud service they are really looking at instead of relying on fuzzy definitions that sound impressive but do not help with real-world support. Once those ideas are clear, the cloud stops sounding like one giant confusing term and starts looking like a set of useful, understandable service choices.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.